This is surely the most famous and the most glorious of ancient monuments in Britain, built over 5,000 years ago. And that's a colossal time in human history. But of course it's trivial. It pales into insignificance compared with the age of the rocks that lie beneath our feet.
The great forces that create our landscape are slow to act. Our ancestors who built this monument would have seen a land very similar to this. This fascinating story of how the South was made can still be seen in the rocks and landforms around us.
We're going to go on a journey round the 7 wonders of the South, the wonders that you have chosen. It's something of a personal pilgrimage for me because I was brought up in the South and I'm revisiting some of these places after a long interval. To help us on our journey, I'm going to call on a little modern technology. Because sometimes the best way to see a landscape, to enjoy it and really understand it, is to look at it from above.
Over millions of years, Great Britain has experienced both tropical seas and Arctic tundra. These extremes have helped produce the remarkable geological character of southern England. Around this developing landscape, a network of tracks and byways allowed people to move between sites of importance. So where better to start our journey than on one of Britain's ancient highways?
The south of England's been forming over hundreds of millions of years as Britain crept slowly across the planet. But I suppose the last great shaping of the south came with the ice. Ice has advanced and retreated, but the last great advance was about 18,000 years ago when the ice cap came down to about junction 9 on the M5 near Tewkesbury. As the ice retreated, masses of water was created which flooded across the south, bringing down silts and clays and covering the landscape with these great chalk ridges standing out like the ridgeway here. As the ice retreated, so the vegetation from the south spread back northwards, and the south of England was heavily wooded, covered with trees. Trees are pretty rare now. Where have they gone?
Local archaeologist Duncan Coe knows the ridgeway particularly well.
What we have to understand is in the Neolithic period, when people were first beginning farming, the trees would have gradually been removed to create land for arable cultivation, to create land for pasture, and to provide wood for building structures and monuments.
So they would have cleared a very extensive range. On the top of the ridge, did they like living high?
I'm not sure if they like living high. I think what we find is that the soils on the chalk were suitable to that early cultivation. Remember, they didn't have large, complicated agricultural machinery. They were tilling the land by hand.
What sort of evidence do we have of early human occupation here?
But what we do have, and why we know human beings were active in this area, is extensive evidence for ritual activity and burial sites. And here we are, this is Wayland Smithy, one of the finest stone chambered tombs of the Middle to Late Neolithic period.
This is this is Stonehenge scale, these stones, aren't they marvellous?
Yes, these stones are fantastic. Of course, these haven't been dragged many, many miles. These are sourced locally. This is sarsen stone that occurs on the downs, but would have been brought here. But the effort in erecting these is really quite impressive.
Absolutely.
And we would have moved in and into these chambers at the side here, where human remains would have been placed probably after they'd been exposed. So we were probably talking about bringing human bones in rather than the whole body. And this would have been used as a communal burial site for many, many generations.
Oh, what an amazing place. Yeah, this does remind me of Maze How in Orkney, the same kind of a chambered tomb, you would call this?
Absolutely, yes. We've got 3 chambers here, a small chamber behind you, and then these 2 side chambers. Anybody walking along the ridgeway would have seen these large stones, would have immediately been able to recognise that this was an important place. This is where the ancestors of the local community were buried, and this is an area that was under the ownership of that local community.
Because we've just walked over from Wayland Smithy and a very clear track now. I mean, would there have been a track in place when Wayland Smithy was being used?
Well, it's difficult to say, but I think one of the things we have to understand is that we have to get out of our modern mindset a little bit. You know, we're used to seeing tracks and roads very closely defined. We're used to seeing tarmac and fences and hedges and a very organised landscape. And I think almost certainly you wouldn't have seen the same landscape in the Neolithic and early Bronze Age period. And what you would have had is a much broader defined access route through the landscape.
These forts always amaze me in just thinking of the physical effort of producing this.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely incredible.
And what's this about, sort of 600 BC or something like that?
This is around 600 BC, yes. The ridgeway was cut off in places, so you had monuments built that actually prevented you using the ridgeway as a through route. And it's possible that what local chieftains were doing was trying to force you through something like this hill fort here as a means of controlling access through this landscape.
Did they want to get a tithe or something from them?
It may just have been a symbolic thing. It may just have been a local chieftain, you know, trying to impose their authority onto this local area. It's possible, of course, that a site like this was much more important in symbolic terms than it ever was in defensive terms, despite these enormous ramparts that were constructed.
Won't you tell me now just how you feel? Won't you help me now? This moment is still.
The 80-odd miles of the Ridgeway run through Wiltshire, Berkshire, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. On their journey east, travellers would pass beneath the steep slope of another great natural feature left after the ice, the Chiltern Hills. Below these hills, the Ridgeway crosses another line of communication, the old London Way.
The old A40 winds its way up the steep, scarp slope of the Chilterns, and I well remember the first time I drove up it. It was in a 25-year-old Armstrong Siddeley. Having some trouble, I had to get into bottom gear, I remember. I was going up to Stokenchurch, a lovely village on the top with a splendid view out over the Oxford Plain. I suppose my predecessors would have had even more trouble when it was a stagecoach road, the main route between London and Oxford. It was so steep that they had to put extra horses at the bottom of the hill, keep them there, tack them on to give the stagecoach a bunk up to the top. it was a pretty bad road. I mean, bad to get up, but also quite risky. There was a lot of cover for highwaymen, and it was notorious. Of course, now we've done away with all that. We have this modern cut through the chalk, and the M40 rushes through it. You're never out of the sound of traffic, but I still think it's a rather dramatic and beautiful sight. You see the lovely chalk face on each side, vegetation coming back onto it, of course. And the old villages are still there. There are coaching inns, and just about the best place in England to see red kites.
But these crystal clear moments are passing me by in a dream. Seems to me life would always been the same.
Nature is slowly reclaiming this chalk. In the absence of grazing, grasses are returning to the raw surface. In time, trees will also return. Today, this commuter belt slowly spreads out from London, but hidden away are small oases of tranquility.
This magnificent avenue of Wellingtonias was planted in the 1860s by John Walters. He was owner of the Times newspaper. Now, they're already 150 feet high, and in California, where these are the giant redwoods of the Sierras, they grow twice as high and they can live for 3,000 years. I don't think John Walters could imagine what they may be like if they survive. John Walters would have alighted from his horseless carriage here on his estate, here at this ridge of open country, grassland with much heather, and he would have been rewarded with a splendid vista southwards over the Blackwater Valley.
These views are sadly not available today. Most of the heathland of 100 years ago has gone, replaced by trees. This is the process of regeneration the Stokenchurch Gap will experience if left undisturbed. The melting ice that shaped the Berkshire Downs and Chiltern Hills had no lesser effect on the London Basin. The outflows and ridges remain.
And this is one of these ridges. Unlike the soils of the chalk downlands, these soils came from a quite different source. They're really the result of the glacial wash from further north in England. They brought down masses of sand and gravel, and the resulting soil is very acid. And the typical plant of this heathland is heather.
Unfortunately for the heather, in our warm and wet climate there are other plants that like the acid soils, particularly birch and pine. As they mature, forming a dense canopy, underneath the heather stands little chance. But under the thick carpet of decomposing needles and leaf litter, its seed lies dormant. Dr. John Dewhurst lives on the ridges. He and other local residents are keen to reinstate the heather ridges from a century ago.
How far would this forest have extended in olden times?
Well, we're fairly near the southwest corner of the actual forest of Windsor, but of course that was continuous with the Eversley and Bagshot that way and Pamber that way, which ran right on down through Bere Ashley and Shute, right, and joined up with the New Forest. So there's a huge swathe of country right through Hampshire.
And that was all royal hunting ground?
It was all royal hunting forest.
The term forest refers to an area maintained as a medieval hunting preserve and not necessarily wooded. A better description is perhaps open country. and this open country would have been a well-stocked larder.
You know, I remember coming here as a boy. I suppose I was 12, 13 years old, and it was certainly, the slope was open, much more open then. It's amazing how it's changed. We want to get those views back again, and so one has to manage the place. I mean, what are you planning to do?
Well, inevitably, you've got to cut trees down, and I know people hate that, and it always causes a certain amount of pain. But if we're ever going to be able to see the views as they were visible from here for probably 1,000 years, I'm afraid that's what we've got to do.
Of course, you can see the way that the birches keep trying to come back.
Oh,
They're
yes.
succeeding here too.
Yes, they come back all the time. And of course, the cattle used to graze them off, but nowadays there are no cattle, so we have to cut it by hand.
Quite a job. But here the heather's coming in very nicely, isn't it?
The heather's coming well here, yes. But it lies dormant there, and as soon as you've got the litter off, it comes up, comes up as little seedlings, see all through here.
So only continued management of Finchampstead Ridges will hold back this natural regeneration.
But what moment in time do you want to conserve? Where do you want your snapshot to stay? Like Finchampstead, this used to be heathland. It was common grazing, people had their animals in here, and there was also woodland industries, broom making and so on. But that's all gone, that stopped in the 20th century, and as you can see, the trees have come back.
The National Trust, in partnership with English Nature, are also restoring heathland around the Devil's Punchbowl, and their weapons of choice: teeth, Exmoor ponies and Highland cattle.
Well, these are really very splendid creatures. They're perhaps a long way from their proper habitat, but they're doing a good job keeping down the tree growth and the higher undergrowth. And heather's beginning to come back. Heathland is returning here, so we can be grateful to them. And they look very nice too.
This newly grazed section of the Punchbowl is slowly regaining its character of a century ago. So, if you want to conserve an area, it's important to know what it used to look like. Not just 100 years ago, but thousands, and that information is still beneath our feet. Dr. Rob Scaife is a friend of mine from Southampton University. He's done extensive research into the history of England's ancient woodlands. Rob and the Punchbowl's National Trust warden, Matt Cusack, are unearthing 2 millennia of plant history.
Slowly, we can open it up. Oh, yes.
Gosh, you really can see several different layers, many layers here, which presumably that's different events.
Yes, you can definitely see layers of sand here which probably relate to changes in the valley side woodland. At the top you can see all this peat, which is really soft and wet, bits of twig in it, and that's what we were getting our feet wet in. And just below this is a very marked horizon of very coarse sand derived from the local green sand bedrock. I mean, that's probably associated with your heathland. And then below this we're back into very nice peat with bits of grasses and sedges in it, you can see. Lower down, horizons of silts and some
very fine
sand.
grained stuff, isn't it?
Which is obviously relates to some sort of changes, maybe woodland clearance or some sort of management locally in the woodland. You can see all the grass and sedge remains in there, which is probably a more stable event. There's very little sediment in there. There's some photographs of typical pollen grains. We have a lime pollen grain on the left-hand side and an oak grain there.
And this would be a lime pollen that was several thousand years old.
This one would certainly is a fossil pollen grain of lime from about 3,500 years ago.
I'm remembering the last time I came here as a student, youth hosteling. Usually, as you get older, the places you remember from your youth seem smaller now. But that hasn't happened with me here. The Punchbowl looks enormous. It's very impressive and very beautiful. This colossal amphitheatre was carved by water, but not as you might perhaps think, a huge river scouring it out in relatively short geological time, but by a much slower process that's operated over millions and millions of years. And it's a process we can still see working today.
That's right, Aubrey. The rain that percolates down through the permeable layer of lower greensand, which we're on here, it then hits a clay layer, and that clay is impermeable, so the water has to go out horizontally.
So the clay layer runs right round the Punchbowl, and wherever the water pressure builds up, it bursts through.
That's it. We've got dozens of springs throughout the Punchbowl.
Well, a few feet in 10 years, give it a few million years, and you can understand how the process worked.
Above the Punchbowl, Hindhead sits on a ridge at the centre of another 4 spring-formed valleys. To the south, these springs feed the rivers that cut through another chalk-dominated landscape. Millions of years ago, the North and South Downs were the lower slopes of an impressive dome of chalk. The centre has been washed away, and the remaining hollow forms the Weald. These steep slopes bear witness to the loss of that natural wonder. To the east, this process continues.
Well, this is where the South Downs meet the sea, and of course we were once joined to the continent, now 20 miles away. There's surely no better place to see that the landscape is changing. These great chalk cliffs are eroding away very rapidly, about 30 to 40 centimetres a year. In a century, it's a bit more than 30 metres, considerably longer than a cricket pitch, and it's going on all the time. It's a remarkable example of dynamic change. Nothing on Earth ever stays the same. This is another lovely landscape shaped by water. It's the valley of the Cuckmere River where it cuts through the South Downs. It's been wearing away at the clays and sands on the inland of the Weald for millions of years. It's worn itself a great broad valley, and it's in fact brought so much material down, it's silted up towards the mouth and Cuckmere Haven, and now it meanders slowly through this flat valley. And in fact, it's still tidal for about 4 miles upstream. I've come here with Patrick Culture, who's an expert on the valley and its natural history. It's a most beautiful view out to sea there, isn't it?
Wonderful view. It's one of the few places on the south coast where a river flows into the channel without a conurbation of a port complex, caravan sites or any other human paraphernalia.
It's pretty intensively grazed now.
Very intensively grazed, and when I was a boy I remember this as a much higher floodplain. Water was higher, there were many more reeds, longer grass, and so in those days there were many more breeding birds there, like redshank, skylarks, lapwings, etc.
With a rising sea level, holding back the tide from surrounding farmland using earth embankments is proving costly to maintain. The Environment Agency's controversial plan to flood the haven and recreate a salt marsh for wildlife is slowly gaining popular support.
What we hope to do is, if they flood the Cuckmere Haven area down south of the 259, we'll have reed beds, as you see down here, which is Charleston reed bed, a wonderful place.
And this kind of habitat might come back if they flood the haven.
I think they could build a reed bed like this south of the A259 and make it a wonderful reserve for birds, as indeed this is.
It's quite a rare habitat in the south of England, isn't it? I mean, this is certainly worth conserving.
Very much so. It's a sort of area that if we made larger, we could get birds like perhaps the bittern.
Now it is a lovely habitat and all too rare in the south of England. Look, I think that's a rebunting there. You see in the Phragmites there?
Yes, there is. A male rebunting.
Lovely black head.
Absolutely brilliant. There it is, feeding
Gosh,
off.
feeding away.
Yeah.
Well, he's got no shortage of food supply here.
Wonderful.
Look at that.
Wonderful. There you are. I said there would be lots of birds here, even in the autumn and winter.
Yeah.
You get the birds here.
I'm here at this particular Seven Wonders of the South with Cassian, Carolyn and Lee Chen, who live as close to Cuckmere Haven as I think anybody could live. I mean, here it is in your face. We see it now on a very, very calm day, but I'm just trying to imagine it when there's a southerly gale and a high tide.
At times we've had to board up the sitting room window. I mean, really, with a gale force 11, the spray will go clean over the house.
What about the shingle beds out here? Do you see change in this from storm to storm?
Definitely. The shingle gets moved around on every tide, and storms, then you can really see the shingle shift dramatically.
What do you feel about the idea to flood the haven and have it as a kind of reserve? Will that make any difference to you, do you think?
Well, it probably would, because the beach will move back and it'll open up a flank, which then exposes us to erosion from behind, which is a worry. But we're looking to the Environment Agency to commit to defending that flank if it opens up.
Sure.
Cuckmere is unique because, unlike other southern rivers of this type, there's been no lasting human development of the haven. Even the Royal Navy once considered its suitability. A survey from 1698 concluded,
"For reasons of decay and improbability of repair, Cuckmere Haven is now, whatever it had been, no proper subject for improvement for the Navy."
Perhaps no big loss to the Navy, as the south coast is blessed with natural harbours and ports. Over the centuries, with the threat of invasion from the French, Dutch, Germans and Scandinavians, ships were stationed along this threatened coastline. For the Royal Navy, no area was more important than Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. Sea levels have risen over 100 metres since the last ice retreat. The sea flooded the valley that became Portsmouth Harbour and cut off the Isle of Wight.
The Needles are wonderful even from a distance, but close up here, as I've never been before, they're tremendously impressive. They got their name originally from two steep pinnacles of chalk which stood just over here. One of them, the big one, was called Lot's Wife, about 120 feet high. But of course the sea is relentlessly wearing away at the chalk, and Lot's Wife collapsed spectacularly in 1764. Gone but not forgotten, because there's a reef just below the surface. This is a dangerous area for shipping. And to get by, mariners rely on three things. One is the accuracy of their charts. The second is the skill of their seamanship. And the third is this.
For the last 145 years, this light has been the Western Solent's most important navigational aid. Trinity House has kindly invited me onto the Rock to meet their commissioning engineer, Richard Penner.
I don't think I've ever been greeted on quite this way before. It's terrific.
Come this way on the lighthouse.
Welcome to Needles Lighthouse. Wow, this is the gateway to the Solent, yeah? So this has stood here for 150 years nearly.
The original lighthouse was on the headland above, but its height made it next to useless in fog. So after only 70 years of service, it was replaced.
Well, I've never been in a lighthouse before. I'm looking forward to it.
The present Needles Lighthouse was manned right up to 1994, when it became automated.
Gosh, there it is. That's the source. And all this glass around here, this serves to concentrate the beam.
Yeah, that's right. The lens is arranged so that it magnifies the light and also refracts the light down into a central point, which gives a range of 22 miles.
Boy, it's most beautifully fitted into these metal stanchions here. Is this old glass?
It's probably been here since the lighthouse was built.
So more Victorian engineering here. Yeah. And this is on perpetually, Dick?
Yes, it's on for 14 seconds and off for 2, then on again for 2, off again for 2, so you've got 2 flashes every 20 seconds.
And that's the kind of signal of the Needles Lighthouse?
That's unique to this station.
Yeah.
One of those lamps fails, it then automatically rotates to number 2 position, which is this one here.
Right, I see.
If that one fails, there is also a backup, which is the emergency position, which is the one in the middle.
And this design hasn't really changed in the whole life of the lighthouse. It's just as it was. Chalk's a most remarkable substance. There's an immense amount of it in Britain. It stretches north to Yorkshire, it stretches underground, right out into Europe, comes up in the Crimea. Now, none of this rock would exist if it weren't for life. It began to be laid down something like 65 million years ago, and it was at a time when Britain and much of Europe was much further south, nearer the equator, warm, shallow seas. And in those seas lived planktonic organisms, and it's they who make up chalk because this is their skeletons. As they died, their little chalk calcium carbonate skeletons sank to the bottom, got compacted and formed chalk. Now just consider that these were microscopic organisms, coccoliths many of them were called, and the very largest of them, the giant among coccoliths, would have been 2 millimeters across. Think about how much chalk there is and how many coccoliths that needs to make it.
The layers of Needles chalk have been twisted vertically, giving them more resistance to the sea. They're part of a ridge which not only forms the backbone of the Isle of Wight, but only 10,000 years ago continued west over Bournemouth and Studland Bay to the Jurassic Coast of Dorset.
And this is the other end of that ridge. That's Bat's Head on the Dorset coast, the Jurassic Coast. And you can see the wonderful vertical structure of that chalk. And you can imagine this ridge coming back over my head to the Isle of Wight. This is a wonderful place, and this is where it gets really exciting. I think even though I live in Scotland now, this would be one of my 7 wonders of Britain. The Durdle Door. This glorious natural arch carved by the sea through this hard limestone rock. That rock at one time would have extended right over to Portland Island in the distance. And you can see traces of the partly submerged ridge under the sea here. Although this rock is very hard, you can see how it's been forced up into vertical strata by the forces of the earth. And we can see an even better example of those forces at work in Stair Hole nearby.
Maddie Pfaff is the educational ranger at Lulworth, and she shares my passion for the area.
For me, this is geology in one's face, isn't it, really? I mean, I suppose these are durdle doors in the making.
Absolutely, these are examples of small caves which then obviously collapse and turn into arches, and Durdle Door is one of the largest examples of an arch in Portland limestone. And
this fantastic contorted rock over there, I mean, what's happened there?
It's absolutely amazing, isn't it? This is called the Lulworth Crumple, and it's part of, it's a crumple, yeah, literally crumpled. Two huge plates, Africa and Europe, collided, forcing the rocks here up into the current position. So they've gone from flat on the floor, lifted till they're almost pointing to the sky.
The kind of ripple effect, the ripple of that collision has just reached
very
slowly reaches, but still produces these extraordinary forces.
That's right. The rocks have been lifted up from on the sea floor into a position about 45 degrees from their original place. The cliffs behind us here tower up above our heads, but actually they start, if you look back along the beach, right over on the opposite side, and this central section has been removed by wave action coming through these caves and arches.
Well, this is the conflict between the sea and the land in action, isn't it?
Ever present.
Extraordinary to see it. What's it like here in winter with a storm? I mean, there must be violent.
It's absolutely incredible. The waves are nothing like how they are today, although the sea is slightly rough here. But they'll come pounding in and up this shoreline, reaching up to the Wealden beds behind us. And of course, the end result of all this, reaching the Portland limestone, taking away the Purbeck beds and the sea working its way through all the different layers of geology, ends up with the structure of Lulworth Cove, which is that fantastic, almost perfect circular bay that everybody comes here to Lulworth to see.
Stonehenge has stood for 5,000 years, and that's an enormous time in human history. But the landscapes of the Seven Wonders of the South have been forming over many millions of years. We operate on the surface and we can produce some changes, but the forces that shape them are still operating, and they will change anyway.
Looking into some far distant future, the Earth will have moved on, and our descendants would be choosing 7 different wonders of the South.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing